We're now moving on to building the control system to manipulate our IKs. So we have a couple of controls down here, arrows and boxes. I want something that's pointing to our shoulder. I don't want to have a ring around here because it's actually going to get too cluttered. First of all, if we look at our IKs, we got some values on here in both of these. So the FK, this IK, which is the RP IK, is not nearly as many values, but this one does. So if I freeze transforms on this, it didn't zero it out and it didn't fix it. So I'm going to undo. So we definitely need a control for this. Yes, the IK is a control. It's not a joint, but it's not animator friendly. So we need to make a control to manipulate that. Same thing with this guy. So I'm going to take this arrow and duplicate it and move it up. Just going to move it over here. I'm going to rotate it down like that, maybe over to the side like that. Scale it down just a little bit like that. Okay, so I freeze transforms on it. And I ask myself, oh, let's call this our left shoulder icon. Shoulder or clavicle, both fine on this. So where should the pivot point be? We've been hitting on pivot points being on the joints like crazy this month so far, like that. But the difference between this system and the FK system is IKs are translational systems, not rotating systems. The pivot points are really, really, really important when you're dealing with rotating systems because they're going to orbit around that system. In this case, we don't need that. And having the pivot point in here means that every time I want to animate that, I have to go into the shoulder and move it up like that. So I'm going to undo that and put the pivot point right back where it was. Okay. So now I'm going to put the control for this guy right here. And I'm just going to duplicate my hand box. I'm just going to snap that up there too. So why a box? I kind of like rigid objects for my IKs. Let's see, let's go like that. And circular for FKs, or rotates. But as long as you're consistent with your controls, you'll see more and more different systems and people do it, and you'll get your style. And as long as that style stays consistent, it's pretty much fine. So I'm going to freeze transforms on it. He's got no history. And I'm going to call this my left arm icon. And there we go. Okay, now we're ready to connect these systems to make them work. And we ask ourselves, we need to have these controls manipulate these IKs. So are we actually going to use parenting or parent constraining? And through this month, we've been using parent constraining like crazy. And one of our big rules of parent constraining is the thing I'm constraining is no way should be able to be animated by the animator because it's going to be locked out. Well, both these IKs are not going to be animated by the animator. So I could completely say driver driven and do a parent constraint. Make sure the offset's on because they're not the same orientation. And that will work like that. This also gives me the added benefit is that it doesn't move my hierarchy of my IKs. So at the end of the day, I can just group all these together and have one folder with all my IKs in it. However, there is kind of a bug on this that sometimes when I move and I undo, and it's going to be really hard to simulate this because it doesn't happen all the time, is that the constraint will kind of break in the undo and the actual joint won't move down, but the control will. And you'll have to like jiggle the control a little bit to have it snap. And that freaks animators out. It freaks setup artists out. It's just a part of Maya on it. So that's one reason I don't like that. I think that parenting in this case is a much cleaner method of doing it. So I'm going to delete that constraint. And instead, I'm going to select my child. I'm going to start my child and then my parent and hit P, which will parent it underneath it. So now I can grab this and it moves up and down. Okay. And I can do the same thing with this one. Child, parent, and hit P. Okay. So now it's actually moving the system around. That's good. Awesome. Okay. Last thing on here is we want to control the elbow. We need another arrow for this. So I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to snap this guy right on top. You have to make sure that's right on top of it. Like that. Okay. Now, in this case, we want to move it away because we want to have it pointing in. Okay. And I have a two-dimensional object, so I'm going to rotate it a little bit so it's easier to see. I'm going to freeze it. Has no history. I'm going to call this my left elbow icon. Okay. So how this works is this is actually going to be done through a constraint. And if you look at the IK, there actually is, oops, I don't have the IK selected. and I look at the RP solver, well, actually I'm on there, it says twist on here, and I can click that and middle mouse wheel and you can see it twist the arm. But we can actually make a control manipulate this. Now the important thing about this system is it's an aiming system. If I move the pivot point back onto the elbow here, it means that the second I move my IK, it's going to be now aiming at this and it's going to invert the arm, and I don't want that. So you keep the pivot point away from it. And now I'm going to select my driver and then my driven, which is the IK, and I go up into my constraint and there's a pole vector constraint. There's no offset, it's just on. And there it goes, and you see the line comes out from it. Now if I translate my arm and then I move this control, you see the elbow is there. Good. And that's our IK system for arm, our clavicle, and our hand and elbow.